That morning, the Supreme Court of the United States was packed. Reporters, lawyers, lawmakers, even law students crowded in, all vying for a seat in the courtroom. Every eye was fixed on the landmark lawsuit between a multinational corporation and a group of plaintiffs representing a state government, a case predicted to set one of the most significant legal precedents in 2 decades. Leading the team defending the people's interests was Amara Whitfield, a black woman in her 30s, a Harvard Law School alumna and former special advisor to the U.S. Senate. She had left that prestigious post to become an independent advocate for justice, fighting for forgotten communities. Amara entered the courtroom with confidence, clad in a sharply tailored navy blue suit, a thick file folder in hand. Her presence drew murmurs. Many still clung to the notion that a woman of her background didn't belong here. But the most shocking reaction came from none other than Chief Justice Gerald Whitmore, the most powerful figure in the American judicial system. With over 2 decades on the bench, he was known for his stern rulings and deeply conservative views. As Amara stood to speak, Chief Justice Whitmore leaned toward his microphone. His voice rang out, cold and cutting. "Ms. Whitfield, I hope you're aware this is the United States Supreme Court, not a playground for the unqualified." A wave of silence swept the room. A journalist dropped their pen. Opposing attorneys tried to suppress grins. But Amara didn't flinch. She took a deep breath, standing tall, locking eyes with the Chief Justice. "Your Honor," she began clearly and calmly, "if graduating with honors from Harvard, serving 3 U.S. senators on federal legislation, and defending the rights of millions doesn't qualify me, then I'm more than ready to prove my standing right here, in front of the entire nation." The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Amara Whitfield slowly approached the podium. All eyes followed her. But none were as steely as those of Chief Justice Gerald Whitmore, who remained unmoved, believing he had ended her argument with one public insult. Amara placed her folder on the stand, opened it, and drew out a copy of the U.S. Constitution. Her voice was firm. "Let me refer to Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and the judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior. Your Honor, I find no clause in here that permits a judge to strip a citizen of dignity based on race or gender." The courtroom was dead silent. One associate justice tilted his head slightly, as if to mask a personal reaction. Amara continued, now holding a thick stack of documents. "Before you is evidence proving that the defendant, Arcadia Holdings, violated at least 4 federal statutes concerning land use and environmental protection, including unauthorized deforestation of national land, illegal displacement of residents, and money laundering through so-called sustainable development funds overseas." Then she looked up, straight at Whitmore. "I don't need your validation, Your Honor. The truth is in my hands, and the Constitution is my shield, not your derision." A quiet gasp rippled through the gallery. No one dared disrupt court decorum, but the atmosphere had unmistakably shifted. The opposing counsel exchanged anxious glances, and reporters scribbled furiously, sensing a historic turning point. Chief Justice Whitmore furrowed his brow, tapping the arm of his chair. He was known for never being challenged, especially in public. But in front of him stood a woman using the very legal foundations he once vowed to uphold. For now, he could not interrupt her. "You have 3 minutes for your opening argument," he said, voice still cold. "I only need 2, Amara replied, never breaking eye contact. The courtroom held its breath. Amara Whitfield straightened her back and placed her hands on the podium, her presence commanding. The lights above gleamed off the polished wood, and the quiet buzz of tension in the gallery became deafening in its silence. Even the most seasoned justices leaned in ever so slightly, their curiosity piqued. Amara began. "Your Honors, what I present today is not just a legal argument. It is the voice of a community that has been silenced, poisoned, and displaced. Arcadia Holdings has buried their corruption beneath layers of shell companies and charitable fronts. But beneath all that, there is a pattern of greed, abuse, and violation of federal law." With precise movements, she clicked a remote, and a large screen behind her came alive with slides. Slide 1, a satellite image of the Green Ridge National Forest, taken 2 years ago. Lush, vibrant, untouched. Slide 2, the same area 1 year later, vast clearings, construction equipment, pipelines scarring the earth. This deforestation was done under the pretense of clean energy development, she explained. Yet Arcadia never obtained a federal environmental impact assessment, as required by the National Environmental Policy Act. She advanced to the next document, a signed internal memo from Arcadia's vice president. This memo, she said, holding it up for the justices to see, confirms the company's intention to bypass federal oversight by rerouting ownership through foreign subsidiaries, registered in the Cayman Islands. Gasps were barely concealed this time. Even Justice Delgado, known for his restraint, raised an eyebrow. Amara pressed on. And here, she said, moving to the next document, are the financial statements showing $113 million funneled into shell corporations within 3 months of the land clearance project beginning. Not a dime was reported to the SEC. The opposing counsel, once confident and smirking, now furiously scribbled on a yellow legal pad. Their lead attorney, a silver-haired figure with decades of courtroom experience, sat with clenched jaws, clearly blindsided. But Amara wasn't done. Most damning of all, she said, her voice rising with righteous force, is the signed testimony of 37 residents who were coerced into abandoning their homes, some at gunpoint, others through falsified eviction notices. She turned to face the Chief Justice directly. Justice Whitmore, you asked about qualifications. The people I represent didn't ask for degrees or titles. They asked for someone who would stand for them, when no one else would. And that's exactly what I'm doing. For a long, electric moment, silence reigned. Then, unexpectedly, Justice Miranda, the most senior female on the bench, leaned into her microphone. "Counselor Whitfield," she said with a clear, level voice, "this court would like to examine every exhibit you've introduced, immediately." A murmur of agreement echoed across the bench. One justice even nodded. Chief Justice Whitmore's face remained stone, but his hands gripped the armrests tightly. He had tried to humiliate her. Instead, she'd seized control of the courtroom. The atmosphere inside the courtroom had completely changed. What began as a hearing where a powerful Chief Justice sought to put a young lawyer in her place had transformed into a trial where a black woman named Amara Whitfield now held the reins of justice. Court clerks rushed to distribute binders of evidence to the justices. Reading glasses were adjusted. Prosecutors whispered to each other with tense expressions. And the press. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing history was unfolding before them. Chief Justice Gerald Whitmore, who, just 10 minutes ago, had exuded arrogance and control, now sat in unusual silence. He flipped through a folder, brows furrowed. Behind his silver-rimmed glasses, his eyes darted across the pages. He knew it. If Amara's evidence was legitimate, he wasn't just losing a legal argument. He was losing the image of an untouchable judicial leader. Amara didn't waste the moment. "I would like to point out," she said, "that under the Supreme Court ruling United States v. Reynolds, 1953, any concealment of information under the guise of national interest without court oversight is unconstitutional." Arcadia cited energy security as a justification to avoid audits, yet never filed any national security reports with Congress or relevant agencies. She turned toward the bench, her voice like a gavel striking at the wall of power. "They act as though the law does not apply to them. And if today, right here, we do not draw a line, how many more communities will be wiped off the map tomorrow in the name of development?" One of the justices known for expertise in environmental law leaned over to whisper to a colleague. At the defendant's table, Carlisle Brennan, the lead attorney for Arcadia, stood abruptly and requested to respond. Chief Justice Whitmore looked at him, then at Amara. "The court acknowledges the defendant's request for rebuttal," he said. "However, before proceeding, we require confirmation. Are the documents submitted original, unaltered, and federally notarized?" Amara nodded firmly. She produced a sealed envelope and handed it to the court clerk. After several minutes of verification, the clerk gave a silent thumbs up. Justice Whitmore surveyed the room. Everyone was watching. "The court acknowledges authenticity," he said slowly, "and will recess to allow the justices to convene privately for 30 minutes. The gavel struck. The courtroom paused. Amara returned to her seat. She did not smile, nor gloat. But her eyes that had looked the Chief Justice squarely in the face without flinching, now glowed with one thing: faith in justice. The chamber doors closed behind the justices, leaving a courtroom thick with anticipation. Outside, the media was in a frenzy. Headlines on digital platforms blazed, Amara Whitfield flips the Supreme Court. Social media exploded with short clips, especially the moment Amara challenged Justice Whitmore, already going viral. Inside, Amara sat still, eyes fixed on the statue of Lady Justice at the end of the hall. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, from the day she left her political post to fight for the powerless. If you don't speak, who will speak for those without a voice? In the private deliberation room, the 7 justices sat in a semicircle, reviewing the thick files Amara had presented. Presiding over the meeting was Justice Miranda, the senior female justice who had called for the immediate review of the evidence. "I've read the witness testimonies," Miranda began, her voice firm. "If verified, Arcadia is not just guilty of legal breaches, they've orchestrated systemic crimes, hiding behind regulatory loopholes." Another justice, Justice Perez, known for his neutrality, added, "I've reviewed the tax records from the Cayman Islands. The wire transfers align precisely with the funds Whitfield documented. It's deeply troubling." At the end of the table, Chief Justice Whitmore remained silent. No one dared question him, but they all knew, his opening insult to Amara wasn't just inappropriate, it could now be interpreted as judicial bias, even discrimination, if made public. After 30 minutes of intense deliberation, Justice Miranda spoke. "I propose we convene a special evidentiary hearing to formally review all submitted materials. This is no longer an ordinary civil case." No one objected. All eyes turned to Chief Justice Whitmore. He nodded, slowly, heavily. "I concur," he said hoarsely, "and I will recuse myself from presiding over the upcoming hearings to preserve impartiality." The statement landed like an earthquake. A Supreme Court Chief Justice, stepping down mid-trial from a nationally critical case? Minutes later, the justices re-entered the courtroom. Justice Miranda now sat in the Chief Justice's chair. She struck the gavel, her voice powerful and unwavering. "This Supreme Court hereby opens a special evidentiary hearing to investigate alleged federal law violations by Arcadia Holdings. Furthermore, Chief Justice Gerald Whitmore will no longer preside over this case, in the interest of maximum judicial fairness." The courtroom erupted. Some gasped. Others wept silently. Amara didn't move. But inside her, it felt as though a universe had just ignited. Arcadia Holdings, one of the most powerful financial forces in America, had never been cornered like this. From its glass towers in New York to its global offices in London, executives were in panic mode. Emergency board meetings were underway. Stock prices began to dip sharply by early afternoon, just hours after the court's recess. A financial director on the board, when pressed by a journalist, muttered, "No one expected that girl to turn the entire Supreme Court upside down." Back in the courtroom, the special evidentiary hearing resumed, and 4 witnesses brought forward by Amara left the entire room stunned. The first was a frail, gray-haired woman, Claudia Romero, a longtime resident of the Green Ridge area who had been forcibly evicted 2 years ago. "I'd lived there since 1969. One day, 3 men in suits came with papers and police. They said my land was no longer fit for residential use. I'd never been served, never saw a court, never had a lawyer." The room fell into hushed murmurs. Amara nodded gently toward the woman, offering calm reassurance. The second, Malik Browder, a former security guard at one of Arcadia's operational sites, revealed, "I saw them bury dozens of unlabeled barrels, some kind of fluid. Every time it rained, the water turned strange colors. One time I asked a supervisor. He said, 'If you don't see it, it didn't happen.'" His voice was gravelly, filled with fear and regret. The third, Danica Ellis, a former internal accountant, testified, "I submitted risk reports to management at least 5 times. Each time, I was told, 'You don't understand corporate strategy.' But I saw money being transferred without invoices, without justification. Some of it came from humanitarian funds supposedly for orphan children." A wave of unease swept across the room. And finally, the 4th witness, a complete surprise to even the justices, Jared Whitmore, the grandson of Chief Justice Gerald Whitmore and a data engineer for Arcadia's contract system. He stepped up to the witness stand, took a deep breath, and spoke slowly. "I know I'm betraying the company, and maybe even my own family. But the truth is, I designed a filtering system that identified vulnerable communities, mostly people of color, indigenous populations, and the poor, for targeted land acquisitions. A shocked gasp escaped the back of the courtroom. Amara said nothing, but her eyes shimmered, not with triumph, but with deep understanding. This was history in the making. Outside the courtroom, Arcadia's legal representatives began to pull back. Several major investment partners announced suspensions in their ties with the corporation. The financial giants, who once acted as if law was beneath them, were now trembling. Her name was Amara Whitfield, and she had just made the mighty tremble. Within hours of the special hearing, the name Amara Whitfield had taken over every news broadcast, front page, and social media platform. But this time, no one called her inexperienced or an ambitious black lawyer. Now, the headlines all screamed in unison. Amara Whitfield awakens American justice. Chief Justice steps down. Young lawyer shocks the nation. Attorney Amara, when truth overthrows power. Primetime television devoted entire segments to analyzing Amara's strategy, from her use of constitutional law, to her selection of witnesses, to the way she handled being publicly insulted in court. A veteran legal analyst on CNN remarked, "This wasn't just a court hearing. This was a declaration that in a system long accused of bias and injustice, there are still people like Amara Whitfield who dare to stand, expose, and demand change." At Columbia Law School, students packed into lecture halls to watch the hearing live-streamed. When Amara confronted Chief Justice Whitmore, the room erupted in applause like it was the final seconds of a championship game. In California, a group of single mothers, many victims of unjust land policies, gathered in a bakery, watching the news with tears in their eyes, holding each other's hands. One said, "She's the voice we never had." On Twitter, the hashtag #StandWithAmara surged to #1 global trending in under 3 hours. TikTok exploded with clips of Amara quoting the Constitution, witnesses breaking down in tears, and Whitmore's stony face as he stepped down. One video surpassed 10 million views that same evening. But not everyone was cheering. At Arcadia's corporate headquarters, their legal team was flooded with calls. The board held an emergency late-night meeting. One executive, head of PR, warned, "If we don't launch a counter-media campaign now, Arcadia won't just lose a lawsuit, we'll lose market trust." But just then, a bombshell dropped. The Department of Justice formally launched a criminal investigation into Arcadia Holdings, based on the evidence submitted by attorney Amara Whitfield. Amid the chaos, Amara quietly returned to her small Washington, D.C. office, a modest 300-square-foot room, no sign on the door, no receptionist. Just her and 2 tireless assistants. When she checked her phone, a text from her mother lit up the screen. "Baby girl, I just saw you on TV. I've never been prouder. You are exactly what this world needs." Amara held the phone close and leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. In one day, she had made an entire nation stop and listen. While America was praising Amara Whitfield as a new symbol of justice, doors behind the scenes of power were beginning to quietly shut. On Capitol Hill, a group of younger senators, led by Senator Angela Moore, who once worked with Amara during her political advisory days, filed an emergency petition to launch a hearing on systemic corporate interference in the judiciary. If Arcadia could silence federal agencies for years, who knows how many other corporations have done the same? Moore declared on the Senate floor. At the White House, the president received an 87-page report from the Department of Justice. At the bottom of the final page, bold letters made him frown. A full review of Supreme Court justices' accountability and potential conflicts of interest is advised. No one mentioned Gerald Whitmore by name, but everyone understood the warning. In a secluded Virginia estate, Whitmore sat alone at his desk. Newspapers lay in stacks before him, every single one with Amara's name on the front page. A TV played in the background. Sources say the Supreme Court Ethics Committee is quietly considering a hearing on Justice Whitmore's familial and financial connections to Arcadia Holdings. He turned off the TV and closed his eyes. The once untouchable image now loomed over him like a shadow. He had once believed he was invincible. But he forgot, one small crack is all it takes to topple a monument, if the right person appears at the right time. Back in Amara's modest office, she sat with her 2 assistants, Mateo and Deja. There was no champagne, no celebration, just work. "This fight isn't over," Amara said, flipping open a new case file. If Arcadia did this for 10 years, they're not the only ones. And we're going to the root. Deja looked at her with pride. You don't want to take even one day to breathe? Amara smiled softly. That day will come. But not today. Meanwhile, in a small apartment in Atlanta, a 13-year-old black girl held a pencil, drawing a woman standing on a podium, holding up the Constitution. Beneath the image, the girl wrote, "I'll be a lawyer too. Just like Miss Amara." A week after the historic hearing, the wave called Amara Whitfield hadn't died down. It was evolving into a quiet judicial revolution. In law schools, students organized seminars and workshops themed Law for the People, a topic previously overlooked in elite academic settings. Professors who once claimed, "the system will correct itself," now faced a classroom of students no longer willing to wait. At Harvard, the case Arcadia v. The People of Greenridge was officially included as a case study in a corporate responsibility and public law course. In the southern states, where many communities had been displaced under the banner of urban renewal, a new movement was forming. Independent legal teams, inspired by Amara, began offering pro bono services to families forced off their land. One young lawyer in Alabama said, "I used to think we couldn't fight the corporations. But if one woman could stand alone in the Supreme Court and make the nation listen, why can't we?" In politics, subtle shifts were happening. 3 senators who had received donations from Arcadia quietly returned the money. State-level judges began to face renewed investigations into their corporate-linked rulings. The Department of Justice formed a special task force to review over 15 years of clean energy projects flagged for corruption similar to Arcadia's. As for Amara, her calendar overflowed: interviews, conferences, invitations from universities, partnership offers from global human rights organizations. But she chose only a few. And every time she stood to speak, she echoed the same message. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who said, no, at the right place, at the right time. And I believe every one of us holds a no powerful enough to change the world." Back at her office in D.C., a handwritten letter arrived. No return address. "I used to be legal counsel for a company like Arcadia. I stayed silent for too long. Now I'm ready to speak, if you're willing to listen." Amara folded the letter slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "It's starting," she said to Mateo. "What is?" he asked. "The ripple effect. People are beginning to believe that justice is real." On an early weekday morning, in front of the Supreme Court of the United States, a line of people stretched farther than anyone had seen before. They weren't there to protest. They weren't there to shout. They were there to submit. Over 10,000 signatures, printed and bound into 43 official volumes, were delivered by a group of citizens directly to the administrative office of the court. On the first page, bold letters read, "A People's Petition for Reforming the Federal Judiciary." Signed below were victims of forced land evictions, former corporate employees silenced by NDAs, students denied access to legal education, and countless everyday citizens who simply wanted to see justice done right. Back at Amara's office, Deja looked up from her laptop in astonishment. "They're proposing a law named after you." Amara glanced up from a case file, raising an eyebrow. "After me?" "Yes." "The Whitfield Act, a bill demanding stronger independent oversight over federal judges and legal protections for vulnerable communities." Mateo nodded thoughtfully. Not bad for someone a Chief Justice once called unqualified. Amara smiled, not with pride, but with quiet resolve. She turned to her laptop and opened a new file, typing the next case title. Class Action Lawsuit, Louisiana Agricultural Land Seizure Investigation. Meanwhile, at the United Nations headquarters, an international forum titled Justice and Community Rights convened. Guest of honor, Attorney Amara Whitfield. When she took the stage, applause thundered through the room, so long that organizers had to ask the crowd to be seated twice. Amara began not with gratitude or grand declarations. She began with a story. "I once represented an elderly woman named Claudia. She was evicted from her ancestral land. No court hearing. No legal notice. Just an administrative order, cold and final. I couldn't save her land. But I promised her story would not disappear." She looked out over the audience, her voice steady. "And I know in every country, in every system, there are Claudias, who are forgotten. We may not be able to save them all, but we can stop the next one. That day, one photograph went viral around the world. Amara standing among hundreds, behind her a banner that read, "Justice is not a privilege. It is a fundamental right." From that moment, a new generation was inspired. A generation of lawyers who didn't choose big firms for the paychecks, but chose to sit beside the forgotten. A generation of citizens no longer afraid of power, because they had seen what one voice could do when it stood alone, and made an entire system listen. Her name was Amara Whitfield, and she had reignited a belief that justice, with courage to guide it, will always find its way.